Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Josh Reeves here with a special report on the Standing Rock pipeline issue. Now, this is something I hadn't really discussed at great length and really only mentioned for the first time in the past week or so on my radio show, but this is a special report and analysis from me on this issue after looking more into it. I had mentioned last week that, I've remained quiet on this issue because, when you've been into this stuff as long as I have, you start to see patterns and you start to see little things. And, I'm always skeptical of what issues get chosen to be the upfront issues that everybody throws their support behind, and it goes viral on social media and all this stuff, when there's all these other issues that never get chosen and never get selected as these. So I'm always curious as to why certain issues get chosen to be the one we're supposed to put all of our support and care and interest to over others. And this is an absolutely objective view on this, and that's the other problem. There's not a lot of objectivity. There's a lot of people running around on working on emotion, and there's people that they're just strictly going off of their emotional response to the information they're being given. Their hearts are in the best places, but the fact of the matter is, people are running around on this thing thinking it's simply a black and white issue, and it's not a black and white issue, but they always want to try to make these things the simple left versus right, good versus bad issue, and they're not always as simple as that. I had really just thought this was, look, why now? Why this? This kind of stuff has been going on for a long time. Why all of a sudden did this become a hot button issue? I started seeing it being scripted almost like a Hollywood movie. And then when I started seeing all the, these big Hollywood names and stuff throwing their support behind it and sending money there, I started having, suspicions that there was something more to this than meets the eye. Now, hear me out here, because I know there's a lot of you out there that are acting exactly as I just described. You're running strictly off your emotions. I've already had this happen. People who run strictly off emotions, I'm thinking, don't allow rational thinking to be at the forefront, will run all over you and criticize you just for even questioning this stuff. This is not just as simple as somebody's definitely right and somebody's definitely wrong here. It's just not as simple as that. But the way they always portray these things, it's always portrayed as the big evil media, the big evil government, big evil corporations, big evil oil companies. And this is all about their greed and their care of nothing but money, and they don't, who it hurts and whatever else be damned. Right? Well, duh, hello. We all know that. Why all of a sudden is this particular issue has become such a hot button issue? Well, there's, I had not really looked, I'll be honest with you, until recently, I hadn't really looked into any of this. I didn't really know what was going on other than pretty much exactly what I, just described and what everybody else pretty much assumes is the situation here. But I just started noticing that there was something else going on. And I mentioned that last week. Well, I had started getting reports. I had speculated. I said, look, I probably, even though I don't have anything to back this up, probably, this could have something to do with the continuation of what I've talked about for years, and that is the destruction of ancient sites and the taking over of certain places that have particular interest to the powers that be. And after looking into this extensively, doing extensive research into this, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you now, right here, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that is absolutely a fact. That is what's going on here. I was absolutely correct. And after looking into this, I didn't realize that I already had looked into this area before and actually had information about this area, Standing Rock in North Dakota. And after I started looking at it, it started all coming back to me. I went, oh, wait, well, I already knew about all this. I'd already researched it because, North Dakota is not really a place that you think of there being mounds there, but there are mounds in North Dakota, specifically in that area. And someone sent me a picture from somebody who's there at the Standing Rock thing, and on top of there's these floodlights and basically a base camp, and it's on top of this gigantic mound. It's this huge, massive mound. I mean, this thing's massive. It's bigger than Monk's Mound in Cahokia, and that thing is bigger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its base is bigger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. I've been there. It's in my film Lost Secrets of Ancient America, Volume 2. What I didn't realize is that in my research, in my Lost Secrets of Ancient America research, and in my Rockwall research, one of the things that I had started to find over and over again were the building of lakes, specifically lakes, but also other structures, towns, whatever they may be, but really a whole lot of lakes. It's unbelievable. It's not just one or two. There are there was probably more than this, but I mean, there's at least 30 or 40 that I found in the United States alone of lakes, man-made lakes being built on top of ancient sites specifically. They could have built them 5 miles down the road, but in all these cases, they specifically built these things on ancient sites. I found it, I mean, of course, that's the case in Rockwall. Much of the Rockwall and stuff is covered by Lake Ray Hubbard and covered up by it. That was my first indication of it, and then I found that in Alabama, Muscle Shoals. I covered that in Lost Secrets Volume 1. We had that song from Drive-By Truckers in there, Uncle Frank, and it's a fictional, the song's not based on a real character, but it's based on real events. And it's about these, basically hillbillies and people who ran out of there and promised all these jobs and sold their property for pennies on the dollar. And then they came in there and built this lake and flooded out all this stuff and never, came through on their promises to these people. But what I found in my research is that what they did that to cover up these more ancient sites that had been there for years and years and years. And little did I know I had come across this information because I started looking up. I was like, well, are there mounds? I was thinking, are there even mounds in that area? In South Dakota? I mean, I don't even know. So I went and looked, and of course, Standing Rock State Historic Site. If you go there, it's we can just look that up. The Standing Rock State Historic Site website. It's history.nd.gov historic sites / Standing Rock / index.html. And yeah, I mean, little did I know there's mounds all around that area. And then I started reading more into it, and it started coming back to me. Well, wait a minute, I knew that. I knew there were mounds there. I knew this. Started looking into it and reading more, and this is not the first time this has happened. And I had come across information. There's a Oahe, Lake Oahe. That's the lake that they're trying to build. Here's the thing. God, there's so much. Bear with me here because there's so much information. It's very hard to lay this out succinctly, so I'm going to do my best here. I started hearing reports that there were archaeological sites being destroyed and have already been destroyed as far back as the September of this year by bulldozers and whatnot. Now, after looking into this, because I was getting conflicting reports that they had already been bulldozing mounds. Somebody said, oh, that big mound's been bulldozed. No, that big mound has not been bulldozed. In fact, no mounds have been bulldozed yet. Now, what they did bulldoze over, and here's what's interesting about this. What they bulldozed over, the Sioux Indians didn't even know about it until right before they bulldozed over it. They didn't even know it was there. They had no idea. it wasn't until they were out on this land right before they were coming in to start bulldozing stuff that they made these discoveries, and by then it was too late for them to get any kind of historical protection. But the stuff that they they've destroyed, it's supposedly, ancient, like burial sites and stuff like that, Sioux Indian stuff. But this Lake Oahe, this was the first. I mean, that was the first thing that happened back in the 1960s, and nobody gave a shit then. Nobody stood up and tried to do anything about like they're trying to do now. That's for sure. But Lake Oahe, in the 1960s, the Army Corps of Engineers built 5 dams on the Missouri River, and it forced the Native Americans to relocate from the flooded areas. Now, I first heard about Lake Oahe. I forget what book I was reading. I was reading something when I was doing my Lost Secrets research, and I'd come across the mention that there was an ancient site found near where Lake Oahe was, and that's right on Standing Rock. That's where it is. It's in the Standing Rock Reservation. And I could never get a lot of information on what this ancient site was, but it was pretty important, and important enough for them to build 5 dams and dam up the Missouri River and create Lake Oahe, submerging this ancient site and displacing all the Native Americans. It says here, as of 2015, poverty remains a problem for the displaced populations in the Dakotas who are still seeking compensation for the loss of the towns submerged under Lake Oahe and the loss of their traditional ways of life. Now, here's what's interesting to me about this. So they built this Lake Oahe, to cover up whatever was there, right? And now they want to go underneath it and put the pipeline underneath it. I mean, it's wide open territory out there. You could go a little ways east or west from this thing, and you could still have your pipeline. Why do they want to run this thing specifically through here? Well, if you look into the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Lewis and Clark expedition went right through that area, and they were all in there. I covered this some years ago on the show. It's probably been 4 or 5 years since I talked about this. But I had talked about the real truth of what the Lewis and Clark expedition was all about. And it sure it sure was not about trying to find an east-west waterway, where you could travel from east to west through a waterway. That was the cover story they gave, Thomas Jefferson. But it's a fascinating story because Meriwether Lewis, there's a lot of indicators, there's a lot of suspicious stuff around his death. A lot of indicators that he was murdered. The real story of what the Lewis and Clark expedition was about was not about finding an east-west waterway. They were charged by Thomas Jefferson to find information about all of these ancient sites that are spread across the United States. And Meriwether Lewis kept extensive journals, personal journals, detailing the many, this didn't just happen once or twice. This happened all the way across the United States. The many races of giants that they encountered. And not only giants, but Native American tribes that they described as having white skin and blue eyes. When you look at how Enki was said to have had blue eyes, and even scientifically, there were articles about this a couple of years ago. They talk about how everybody with blue eyes traces back to one common ancestor that originated in ancient Sumeria. And I was sitting there reading that going, I mean, fucking A, dude. That's Enki right there. I mean, genetic proof. So when I had looked at, when I started finding all these indicators that there had been at least somebody here with knowledge of these Anunnaki, and I started seeing all of this, all this evidence at all these ancient sites, much like what some of what Freeman and I talked about. Started seeing all of these things that went back to that. Then I started saying, "Oh, wait a second here. This is why." We've never been able to find all these Meriwether-Lewis journals. Supposedly some of this stuff has gotten out, but of course it's safe to assume those are locked away in some vault in the Smithsonian. But essentially, they had found all this evidence of these ancient races. Now, during the days of Thomas Jefferson and when all this was going on, the mainstream academic scientific viewpoint was that you had Native Americans and you had a separate race called mound builders who were much older and who were here before them, and they were responsible for building all of these ancient sites. And this was a separate group. Now, after the Lewis and Clark expedition and all this data was gathered and then they started realizing they had a problem. Because, see, Thomas Jefferson, a lot of this cover-up, any of this stuff that we're talking about, when these cover-up of ancient sites goes back to Thomas Jefferson. He was an absolute freak. He was excavating mounds. I mean, he excavated mounds that were on, he bought his property where he built his house had ancient sites on it. And he was out there excavating stuff on his own property. He was way into the idea of ancient giants. He was way into trying to find out the truth of it. But he was also trying to keep this information to himself, just like the city grid structure of Alexandria in Virginia that he's accredited with, that's used, it's still there today, that Thomas Jefferson is accredited with creating. He actually discovered that underneath, when he was doing excavations, he excavated stuff out and found this ancient city grid already underneath the ground that had been there for who knows how long in that area. So once he found out enough of it and tracked it, he covered up the existence of it, didn't tell anybody about it, and then created a quote-unquote new city grid, which was just basically modeled on the one that was already there that nobody knew was there under the ground, and took total credit for it, of which he's given to this day. So that right there shows you he had not only an agenda, he knew full well that how important this stuff was, and he didn't even want his colleagues and people that he knew to find out about it. He was trying to gain this information and gain power and whatever from notoriety from it himself. And so when Lewis and Clark went out on their expedition, they encountered giants. There were stories of them encountering giants sitting in a lotus position on top of some of these mounds from Alabama all the way up through South Dakota and this whole area where we're talking about, where this whole Dakota pipeline thing's going on. One of the things that he supposedly said, and I've had people ask me about this, I can't find it again now. It's like it's been scrubbed. There was a quote from Meriwether-Lewis from one of his journals where he said, somebody in the ancient past shackled these giants within the interior of the earth. And that one day in the future, someone was going to unleash, this is his quote, was going to unleash a plague of giants upon the earth, the likes of which mankind never seen, that would, a plague, basically that would wipe out the human race. And boy, there's been so much effort in scrubbing that, and I've started to see a lot of things that may indicate this may actually be, there may be something to it. Sounds crazy, sounds insane, but there may be something to it. There was a guy, somebody's asked me about this guy before, and I don't know whether the guy's legit or not. I think his name's Corey Good or something like that. I tend to not, here's my opinion. Somebody asked me about this one time, and I was supposed to talk about this for one of our listeners, and I never did. I apologize. So here you go. I'll talk about it now. I'll be honest with you. I'm always skeptical of anybody that claims to be a former insider because there's no such thing. You don't get to a certain level of security clearance within the military, the intelligence establishment, whatever it may be. You don't get to a level of that and level of security clearance and then walk away from it. There's no such thing. And anybody that believes that that is possible is naive and just flat ignorant of the facts. There's no such thing as a former CIA or a former. Once you get to that level, you think they're just going to let somebody have access to all this information and classified stuff and then just allow them to walk away and say whatever they want? No, number one, they have to sign non-disclosure agreements. That's number one. Anybody with security clearances has to sign non-disclosure agreements. So this Corey Good guy, I don't know. Somebody asked me about him, and he talks about the secret space program. A lot of the stuff that he talks about does line up with other stuff that I've researched myself. But that doesn't mean I absolutely endorse him or don't endorse him or anything else. I don't have an opinion, but just in case there are those of you out there who have more information on this guy than me, he claims that he was in Iran and that he discovered, or he was taken into a cave or something. Basically, he claims that, let me see if I can find this. He says, Good claimed that he learned from smart glass pads in the secret space program that ancient giants used stasis chambers to preserve themselves within Native American burial mounds and other ancient constructions. These giants were red-haired, super white Caucasians, very large humans with reddish beards. Yeah, and they looked kind of gaunt. These giants were merely reusing alien technology. They were not the inventors of the stasis chambers. He adds that Abraham Lincoln had viewed one of these stasis chambers and referred to it when he mentioned in a scribbled note to a lecture that a species of extinct giants were buried in the mounds. Yeah, he says. Yeah, he does say that. Yeah, our eyes look over Niagara. I'm going from memory here, but Lincoln's quote was, "Our eyes look over Niagara, just as the eyes of our forefathers, the giants who now exist in the mounds, did." And it's funny because he says, he doesn't say the giants who were buried in the mounds. He says the giants who now exist in the mounds. And that's where he's saying here that he might have seen one of these things. He described the two stasis beings from the video as being one who is dead despite appearing to be a statue and one who was in the process of coming back to life. There seems to be, going into the distant past, a steady progression of a root tongue or a root language that was kind of a proto-ancient Sumerian language that has popped up in a few places in modern archaeology. So, now that's fascinating. That's fascinating. I mean, because he said that these giants are buried in mounds. One of the things that was found right there in that Standing Rock area, this was reported, and I think I mentioned this news report in Lost Secrets. Acres of corpses of a giant race found near Mandan in Bismarck, North Dakota, per Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 1883 newspaper. Beautiful pottery also found. This may have been a battlefield. In an old cemetery covering nearly 100 acres, excavations reveal the fact that the long trenches were filled with the bodies of men and animals thrown in promiscuously. The human bones belong to a giant race, while the dark, beautifully decorated pottery shows the race to have been skilled in that kind of work. There are many indications of its having been a great battlefield. And that's one of the things that I had seen speculation about of Lake Oahe, is that had been a site of when there was the big execution and the wipeout of the giants when they were hunted to extinction. That's where that happened at. Now think about this. So they built Lake Oahe. It's right there in the Standing Rock Reservation. It's where they want to put this pipeline under. They build this massive lake and 5 dams to cover up this. Now they want to go underneath it. And they're totally steadfast about again, you can't go 5 miles one way or the other direction. No, that doesn't make sense. It's wide open country out there. You could move this thing 10 miles over. Again, it's there's so many areas out there. There's no reason, ladies and gentlemen, why they should have to run this pipeline directly through this area other than they have an ulterior motive to what they're doing. And of course, the media and the spectacle of the Hollywood stars and everything, it's simply portraying this as a black and white issue. But my thing is that what if underneath there are where some of these ancient giants are stored? What if they're trying to get under there and in order to unleash these things and wake them up or something? That's what I think's going on here. This is what's got me. This definitely has to do with giants. There's no question about it. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of giant skeletons were found in 100 acres right in that area, right where Standing Rock is. And again, it's wide open country out there. They could have very easily moved this pipeline, a little farther away or somewhere else, but they're running it through this specific area for a reason, and nobody's asking why. And everybody just, is just attributing this to, well, it's bad, and, oh, it's going to hurt women and children and the rest of this, and blah, blah, blah. That's all the stuff to get bleeding heart liberals behind it, and so they can then portray the liberal crazies as radicals and radical crazy environmentalists, and portray them, as violent and the rest of it. And then that's their justification to be able to continue what they're doing. The real protest of this would be to ask the questions about why they've continued to cover up ancient stuff there. And again, one of the reports here, let me find it. That wasn't the full news report. Here's more information on that. Graveyard of giant humans found in North Dakota. Now, Mandan is right there. It's right in the same area. And it says, this has evidently been a great battlefield where thousands of men and horses have fallen. Nothing like a systematic or intelligent exploration has been done, as only little holes 2 or 3 feet in depth have been dug in some of the mounds, but many of the bones of man and beast and beautiful specimens of broken pottery and other curiosities have been found in these feeble efforts at excavation. We asked an aged Indian what his people knew of these ancient graveyards, and he answered, "Me know nothing about them. They were here before the red man." From all indications, this giant graveyard was where they built this lake at and covered it up. So the real question here is, Meriwether Lewis, the guy was obviously murdered for what he knew. And they encountered all of these ancient species. And there was a movie that came out a few years ago, Cabin in the Woods. Watch that movie. I don't want to spoil it for you, but I got to spoil it for you. Look, essentially at the end of the movie, the whole thing is about, it's a fucking nutty movie. But you watch this whole crazy movie and it gets to the end and it's all about this blood sacrifice. They do this blood sacrifice to appease these giants that live in the earth. It's insane. They've been hinting about it for a long time. And kind of like what me and Freeman talked about recently, people, again, are constantly stuck on this idea of, aliens coming from space or a threat coming from space, and they're, nobody's thinking about the possibility that it's here and it's under the ground already. Again, I had not heard about these. When I heard this stuff about the giants being found supposedly in Iran, I was skeptical of it at first. But when it specifically started talking about them being in burial mounds and all of this stuff, and I knew what Mary Lewis had talked about, this plague of giants, and there's, they were there for I don't know how many days. It was quite a long time. The Lewis and Clark expedition was in that area of Standing Rock for quite a good amount of time. But because we don't have Meriwether Lewis's complete journals, all the stuff pertaining to the giants and all that stuff has been wiped from history, with him being summarily executed before he could relate that information to anybody else. Because, again, prior to the ideology of manifest destiny in this country, which was this American ideology of anything that the Native Americans, they basically said the Native Americans were subhuman people, and that anything that they created, they were less human, so that justified them being wiped out. Then you fast forward and we have the Lewis and Clark expedition. They find out what they find out about giants and these other ancient races. Manifest destiny kicks in. You have the massive wiping out and wholesale slaughter of natives across the country. Then once all that's done and over with, literally overnight, all of a sudden, boom, they're changing the history books. Oh, nope, sorry, we were wrong. The Native Americans weren't savages. There actually wasn't a separate race of mound builders. We were wrong about that. The Indians built it all. All the credit goes to them. We're sorry, we fucked up. Now we'll give you reparations in your land and your reservations, and yes, we acknowledge it. All of that belongs to Native Americans. Yes, you built all, which is not the case. It's just flat not the case. So you've got people who are defending this Native American thing, and people don't even know what they don't even know what they're defending. They don't even know what they're up against. But it's the perfect distraction to create and get this ideal that, it's just the big evil corporations and the big money oil companies, and they just want your usual up to their usual business, and that's it. That's all there is to it. And a lot of some Native Americans, they do want the truth, but the fact of the matter is, a lot of Native Americans don't want the truth, and they don't want information about there being a separate race of mound builders and whatnot that were here long before them. A lot of them want, a lot of them love the lie. They want the lie. There are other ones that aren't. Thankfully, I heard recently that there was somebody, one of my listeners was at a sweat lodge, I think, or something. Overheard some Native Americans talking about lost secrets of ancient America, saying good things about it. So, that's encouraging to hear, because I haven't had a lot of good experiences with Native Americans in terms of trying to get them to understand and accept the truth about. And it's not their fault. They've been lied to about their origins, the same as all the rest of us have. But meanwhile, we've got all these protests going on, and that's getting all the attention, and you've got stuff on both sides. There's stuff that sorry, I hate to have to burst your bubble, but there's stuff that the protesters and stuff are saying that the government and whoever is doing that they're not doing. They're making up stuff about them, and vice versa. When you start to see these dirty tactics like this, man, it's hard to take a side. I can't take a side on this, to be honest with you. I don't side with anybody except the truth. And the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, neither side of this is interested in the truth. I mean, that's why do you think these people are doing this? Why do you think they feel that they can go in here and destroy these lands and do this digging and not give fuck one about it? Why do you think it is that they think? Because they know the truth. They know, as well as I know, that what they're after and what they're doing there, it doesn't belong to the history of the Native Americans, but to a race of people that came long before they were here. And as you heard earlier with that news report, you know, even in 1893, you had an old Indian man saying, "No, that's not us. That had nothing to do with us. That was here before the red man. That was here before we were here." That's the key. That's the key right there. The powers that be, they know this. Because, again, it was a known thing in the time of Thomas Jefferson. It was the scientifically accepted fact until after Manifest Destiny and the Lewis and Clark expedition, where they started realizing, wait a second, you know, we've got stuff here that is going to it's going to cause too many questions. There's going to be too many. We've got to squash this and squash any idea that there was this other race and this race of giants, and then we've got to cover up all the, because that's how the giant, why the giant cover up continues to go on, and why there's such disinformation and fake pictures and everything else surrounding that. It goes hand in hand, folks, because as soon as they have to admit that somebody else besides the Native Americans constructed all these ancient sites, especially when you look at stuff like what I uncovered in Ohio with the Newark earthworks and all that stuff. They all have 666 encoded into their construction. Some of these sites use the exact same construction techniques, even though they're built over thousands of years, as if they were working from a blueprint. And that 666 is not the devil and Satan and all this. It's 666 was the Babylonian number for the sun god. They had a numerical system of numbering their gods, the base 60 sexagesimal numerical system that Native Americans had no knowledge or information of, point blank. And that's what a lot of these ancient sites, and especially ones in the Ohio Valley and all these stuff, all have in them. That's the clearest indicator that they were not, that's the biggest piece of evidence that they were not built by Native Americans. The Native Americans had no knowledge, we know this for a fact, they had no knowledge of the base 60 sexagesimal numerical system, not one bit. And that, of course, is why these sites were aligned to the solstices and equinoxes and the rest of it. And why we find all these highly sophisticated things here. So, you know, there has been a lot of speculation about the return of the Nephilim and the return of the Anunnaki and all of this stuff. But, you know, I've just seen too much stuff, too much evidence over my years of looking into this, folks. And I think it's a definite real possibility, as kooky and crazy as it sounds. Meriwether Lewis was trying to tell us about this way back when. You've had more recent reports of this. We've had this hinted about in movies. This idea that some plague of giants unleashed. I mean, this could be their big depopulation thing. This could be the thing they've been waiting to do for years and years and years. But definitely look into, and I'll try to cover this more. It's astounding. Look into giants in North Dakota. Look into giants in that, Lake Oahe, Standing Rock. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of giants found here, and the indication that this was, a massive battle site. So there was some reason and some importance for that there, and I continually find this. They're wanting to do fracking out at Chaco Canyon now. They're wanting to do fracking at Mesa Verde in Colorado. All these ancient sites in the United States, all of a sudden, over the past several years, have now become targets for fracking. Why is it all around these areas? Just like in Iraq. Smack dab on the 33rd degree parallel. That just happens to be where this massive amounts of oil reserves are located. Why is it that all of this oil is all around these ancient sites? because the ancients knew something then that we didn't know for years and years and years, because they had advanced knowledge on par with ours today and exceeding it even. So it's no coincidence why all of a sudden, and I've been warning you and telling you this was coming for years. I told you years ago. Just like I told you about the rise of, I used to call it the new right. I mean, I told you about that with my secret right work starting in 2009. And look what's happening right now. We're a day before the elections, and look what's happening. You know, you've got the alt-right now. That's what I called a few years ago. I told you was going to be the new right back in the 80s when the CMP first started. That was how you had the rise of neoconservatism with the new right. And it became this new political force, became very prominent and strong in the government with the Bush administration. That's what I called the new right, and said it was going to be made up of white nationalists and, truthers, conspiracy theorists, and they were going to rope people into that through the conspiracy theory route. And look, it's here. And just like I told you years ago that they were going to start doing in America what they did in the Middle East and what they're doing there now. Destruction of ancient sites, genocide of the indigenous people, all in an attempt to cover up this ancient knowledge, these ancient sites. And that's undoubtedly what's going on here with this Standing Rock thing. So we need to draw attention to this. And it'd be nice if the people that are, behind this were really getting behind it for the right reasons, but good luck making that happen. Anyway, as per usual, more than meets the eye with all of this stuff, ladies and gentlemen. And so there you go.